At my granddaughter's wedding, I discovered that I was the unwanted one. I didn't gasp. I didn't confront anyone. I simply stood there in the lobby of St. Andrew's Church, holding a cream-colored place card with my name, Margaret Whitmore, printed neatly beneath a single word in smaller script. Unwanted. For a moment I thought it might be a joke, some careless printing error from a distracted wedding planner. But as I lifted my eyes I saw Lauren across the foyer, her champagne silk dress catching the late afternoon light, her lips curved in a polite smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. She saw the card in my hand. She didn't look surprised. The church smelled faintly of white lilies and polished wood. Sunlight streamed through stained glass, scattering soft colors across the marble floor. It was a beautiful day, 72 degrees, clear skies, the kind of June afternoon brides pray for. I had spent the morning carefully fastening the pearl necklace my late husband gave me on our 40th anniversary. I chose a navy blue dress, modest and elegant, the kind that photographs well but doesn't demand attention. I wanted to look like what I was supposed to be. A proud grandmother watching her first granddaughter walk down the aisle. I had contributed $40,000 to this wedding. Quietly. Without conditions. When Emily called 6 months ago, her voice trembling with excitement about venues and flowers and string quartets, I told her not to worry about the budget. Your grandfather would have wanted this, I said. And I meant it. I believed that love showed up in practical ways. In checks written, in tables set, in traditions preserved. I believed that family meant permanence. Inside the sanctuary, guests were already taking their seats. I walked in slowly, my heels echoing softly against the stone floor. The usher glanced at my card and hesitated just long enough for me to notice. Your table is toward the back, ma'am, he said gently, gesturing toward a round table near the exit doors. Not the family section near the front. Not beside my son. Toward the back. I nodded and thanked him. I have always believed that dignity is quiet. I smoothed the front of my dress and made my way down the aisle, passing relatives who offered tight smiles and quick greetings. Daniel, my son, stood near the altar adjusting his tie. For a split second our eyes met. He looked away first. Lauren was beside him, whispering something that made him nod. I remembered when Daniel used to reach for my hand before school concerts, afraid of forgetting his lines. I remembered holding him in a hospital room 38 years ago, promising I would always protect him. Somewhere along the way, that promise shifted direction. I sat at the back table alone for several minutes before two distant cousins joined me. The program listed immediate family in bold print. My name was absent. I traced the embossed letters of Emily's name on the cover and felt something settle in my chest. Not sharp, not explosive, but cold and clear. This was not an accident. Someone had made a decision. Someone had printed that word and placed it deliberately in my hands. The organ music began, soft and reverent. Guests turned their heads toward the entrance. I folded the card carefully and placed it inside my clutch. I would not cry. I would not cause a scene. I would watch my granddaughter marry the man she loved. But as I sat there, listening to vows about loyalty and honor, I understood something with startling certainty. Being unwanted is not the same as being powerless. And Lauren had just mistaken my silence for weakness. The ceremony unfolded with all the elegance money could buy. The string quartet played softly as Emily walked down the aisle, her white gown flowing behind her like something from a magazine spread. She looked radiant, and for a brief moment I allowed myself to feel only pride. I remembered the day she was born, 7 pounds and 4 ounces, with a stubborn little cry that filled the hospital room. I had held her while Daniel paced nervously near the window, and I promised myself that I would always be a steady presence in her life. Watching her now, smiling at the young man waiting for her at the altar, I wondered when exactly my presence had become negotiable. The vows were beautiful, carefully written, full of promises about partnership and respect. The guests dabbed at their eyes. I kept my posture straight, my hands folded neatly in my lap. Every so often I felt someone glance in my direction, then quickly look away. It is remarkable how silence can travel through a room even during applause. When the minister pronounced them married, the sanctuary filled with cheers. I stood with everyone else clapping politely. Lauren embraced the mother of the groom with theatrical warmth, her voice carrying just enough to be heard. She did not approach me. Daniel remained at her side, his hand resting lightly on her back as if tethered. At the reception hall, crystal chandeliers shimmered above round tables draped in ivory linen. A large banner near the entrance read "Welcome to the Whitmore celebration." I paused before stepping inside, adjusting my clutch beneath my arm. A young hostess directed guests to their tables, confirming names with a tablet. When she reached mine, she offered a tight smile and guided me once again to the table near the doors leading to the patio. I noticed then that the immediate family table near the dance floor had 12 seats. There were 11 people seated. One empty chair remained, conspicuously filled with a decorative floral arrangement. I studied it from across the room. It would have been the natural place for a grandmother. Instead, I sat beside distant relatives and a retired neighbor who spoke mostly about his golf handicap. Speeches began after dinner. The best man offered humor. The maid of honor spoke about childhood memories. Then Daniel stood, tapping his glass gently. He spoke about sacrifice and love and the strength of family. He thanked Lauren for her dedication, praised Emily for her grace, and acknowledged relatives who had traveled from out of state. He did not mention me. Not once. I did not lower my eyes. I simply listened. When applause filled the room, I joined in, my expression calm. I have learned over the years that composure unsettles people more than confrontation ever could. Later, as guests moved toward the dance floor, I noticed a subtle shift in the air around me. Conversations quieted when I approached. A few guests offered sympathetic smiles, as though I were enduring something fragile and unfortunate. Lauren passed my table carrying a flute of sparkling water. She paused briefly and said, almost sweetly, "I hope you are comfortable back there, Margaret." Her tone suggested concern. Her eyes did not. I met her gaze and nodded. "I am exactly where I need to be," I replied. And in that moment I began to understand that placement is rarely accidental. It is chosen. And so is response. The music grew louder as the evening progressed, but the space around me seemed to grow quieter. I watched from my seat as Emily and her husband shared their first dance beneath the chandelier light, their movements slow and careful, as if they were stepping into something sacred. I felt a familiar swell of emotion, the kind that comes from witnessing a life chapter turn. I had imagined this day so many times, always picturing myself near the front, perhaps holding her bouquet for a moment, whispering something steady and reassuring before she walked into her future. Instead, I remained near the patio doors, where a cool draft brushed against my shoulders every time someone stepped outside. I noticed patterns I had ignored for years. Christmas dinners where my chair had been subtly moved to the far end of the table. Birthday gatherings where photographs were taken before I arrived. Invitations that came later and later, until sometimes they did not come at all. I had told myself that families evolve, that younger generations create their own rhythms. I had convinced myself that feeling slightly outside the circle was simply part of aging. But sitting there that night, watching Lauren glide across the room orchestrating conversations and directing servers with small gestures of her hand, I understood something more deliberate was at work. This was not drift. It was design. A young woman approached my table carrying a tray of champagne glasses. She hesitated, then leaned closer and said quietly, "I just wanted to say you look lovely this evening." Her kindness felt unscripted. I thanked her and asked her name. "Sophie," she replied. Her eyes flicked briefly toward the front tables, then back to me. "I handled the seating chart earlier this week," she added softly. "There was a change made at the last minute." I held her gaze without blinking. "A change?" I repeated. She nodded almost imperceptibly. "I am sorry. It was not my decision." I placed my hand gently over hers for a second, steady and warm. "You have nothing to apologize for," I said. "Decisions always belong to someone." When she walked away, I felt the final piece settle into place. Lauren had not acted impulsively. She had planned this moment carefully, perhaps imagining that I would shrink, that I would leave early, that I would confirm whatever quiet narrative she had constructed about me. Instead, I remained seated, shoulders back, expression composed. Daniel crossed the room at one point, stopping a few feet from my table. He looked as though he might speak. His lips parted slightly, then closed. After a brief pause, he turned back toward Lauren, who was watching him from across the dance floor. It is astonishing how much can be communicated without a single word. I realized then that I was not witnessing a spontaneous oversight. I was witnessing allegiance. The air in the room felt warmer, louder, filled with laughter and clinking glasses. Yet beneath the celebration ran a thin, precise line of intention. I finished my glass of sparkling water and set it down carefully. I would not leave before the cake was cut. I would not disappear quietly into the night. If someone wished to label me unwanted, they would have to reconcile that word with the undeniable fact that I was still here, still composed, still fully aware. And awareness, I have learned, is far more powerful than protest. The cake was cut beneath a cascade of soft golden lights, and the guests gathered close to capture photographs of sugar roses and smiling faces. I remained seated for a moment longer, observing the choreography of celebration. Lauren stood at the center of every frame, adjusting Emily's veil, directing the photographer, smoothing imaginary creases from the tablecloth. She moved with confidence, as though she alone had constructed this evening from thin air. I thought back to 6 months earlier, when Emily had visited my home on a chilly afternoon in January, snow still lining the edges of my driveway. She had sat at my kitchen table, sipping tea from the china set her grandfather once admired, and she told me she wanted her wedding to feel timeless, elegant, full of tradition. I had listened carefully. I offered suggestions about floral arrangements, about music selections, about small touches that would honor our family history. She nodded enthusiastically then. She even asked if she could borrow my late husband's silver cuff links for her groom to wear as something borrowed. I had agreed without hesitation. I wondered now whether she remembered that conversation at all. The music shifted to something livelier, and guests began forming lines at the dessert table. Daniel walked past me carrying 2 plates of cake. He slowed as he approached, as if wrestling with an invisible thought. He stopped briefly and said, "You are doing all right, Mother." It was not a question. It was a statement designed to close a door rather than open one. I met his eyes steadily. "I am perfectly fine, Daniel," I answered. He nodded, relief flickering across his face, and continued walking toward Lauren. Relief, I realized that I was not making this difficult. I remembered when he was 12 years old and forgot his lines in the school play. He had frozen on stage under the bright auditorium lights. I stood from the audience and gave him the smallest nod, just enough encouragement to carry him forward. He finished that performance because he knew I was there. Tonight, he did not look to see whether I still was. As the evening continued, I noticed that conversations near my table carried a careful tone. People spoke kindly but briefly, as though uncertain how to navigate my presence. It is astonishing how quickly a narrative can settle over a room, how easily it shapes behavior without being spoken aloud. I thought about the word printed on that card and how deliberate it must have been. Words require ink. Ink requires intention. Someone had decided to reduce me to a single label on a day meant to celebrate union and belonging. I felt no urge to argue. Instead, I reviewed quiet facts in my mind. I had helped pay for the venue. I had contributed to the catering deposit. I had ensured that Emily's trust fund remained intact after her grandfather passed. These were not gestures made for applause. They were acts of love. But love, I understood now, can be reinterpreted by those who find it inconvenient. I rose slowly from my chair and walked toward the dance floor. The photographer glanced at me uncertainly, then gestured politely toward the edge of the frame. I stepped back without protest. I did not need to be in the photograph to know what I had invested. Standing there, hands clasped loosely in front of me, I made a quiet decision. I would not challenge anyone tonight. I would not demand explanation beneath borrowed chandeliers. Some realizations require distance to be handled properly. And distance, unlike humiliation, is something I know how to create with precision. By the time the final toast echoed through the ballroom, the air had grown warm and heavy with perfume and champagne. Guests drifted toward the exit in clusters, heels clicking against polished floors, laughter fading into the summer night. I remained seated until nearly everyone had stood, watching the room empty in slow, deliberate waves. Lauren moved gracefully from table to table, thanking guests, accepting compliments as though they were medals earned in battle. Daniel followed half a step behind her, carrying gifts and envelopes, nodding politely to relatives who praised the evening's elegance. I rose only when the room had thinned enough that my movement would not be noticeable. I walked toward the gift table and placed a small ivory envelope among the others. Inside was not a check. The check had already been written months ago. Instead, there was a simple handwritten note wishing Emily steadiness and courage in marriage, the two virtues I value most. I had signed it with care. As I turned away, Sophie appeared again near the doorway. She hesitated before speaking. "I hope you have a safe drive home," she said softly. "It is about 20 miles, I replied. "I have driven it many times." She studied me for a moment, then asked, "Are you staying nearby?" I smiled faintly. "No," I said. "I prefer my own house. My own space." She nodded, as if understanding something larger than the words themselves. Outside, the evening air was cooler, perhaps 68 degrees, carrying the faint scent of freshly cut grass. I walked alone across the parking lot toward my car, my heels steady against the pavement. I did not look back at the glowing windows of the reception hall. I did not need to. The word printed on that card had already etched itself clearly in my memory. I placed my clutch on the passenger seat and sat quietly behind the wheel for a full minute before starting the engine. Silence filled the car, thick but not oppressive. I thought about the trust documents stored safely in my home office, about the careful estate planning my late husband and I had completed years ago. We had believed in structure, in clarity, in protecting what we built. I had never considered that protection might one day include myself. The drive home felt shorter than usual. Streetlights flickered past in steady rhythm, illuminating stretches of empty road. When I pulled into my driveway, the porch light automatically turned on, casting a soft glow across the front steps. My home greeted me without judgment. Inside, everything remained exactly where I had left it that morning. The grandfather clock ticked patiently in the hallway. The air carried the faint scent of lavender from the sachets tucked in the linen closet. I removed my pearls carefully and set them in their velvet box. Then I retrieved the folded place card from my purse and placed it on the desk in my study. I smoothed it flat against the wood surface. Unwanted. The word looked smaller now beneath the lamp's steady light. Less powerful. Labels often shrink when removed from their intended stage. I sat down in my chair and opened the file drawer containing copies of financial agreements and trust allocations. I did not rush. I did not act out of anger. I reviewed pages calmly, tracing the structure we had built years ago. Control, I have learned, does not require raised voices. It requires understanding where authority truly resides. As midnight approached, I closed the drawer and turned off the lamp. The house settled around me, quiet and loyal. If someone had believed that tonight would diminish me, they misunderstood the foundation on which I stand. Foundations do not crack because of a word. They respond. And I have always been very deliberate in how I respond. The next morning, I woke before sunrise, as I often do. The house was quiet except for the steady ticking of the hallway clock and the distant hum of early traffic along the main road. I brewed a pot of coffee and carried my mug into the study, where the folded card still rested on my desk. In the soft gray light of dawn, the ink appeared almost faded. Words lose their sharpness outside the spotlight of performance. I sat down and opened my laptop, not with haste, not with agitation, but with clarity. There is a difference between reacting and responding. Reaction is emotional. Response is measured. I have always preferred the latter. I reviewed the trust documents again, this time with deliberate attention to the sections concerning discretionary control. Years ago, my husband and I established a family trust to safeguard what we built. It included structured distributions for education, first homes, and significant life events. It also included a clause granting the surviving spouse authority to adjust allocations if circumstances suggested misuse or disrespect toward the integrity of the estate. At the time, we considered that clause a formality. Now it felt precise. I printed a copy of the relevant pages and placed them neatly in a leather folder. Then I called Mr. Henderson, the attorney who has managed our estate planning for over a decade. His voice was steady as always when he answered. "Margaret, good morning. How can I assist you?" I explained calmly that I wished to review and temporarily pause certain discretionary disbursements until further notice. There was a brief silence on the other end, not surprised, simply attentive. "That is entirely within your authority," he said. "Would you like to schedule a meeting?" "Yes," I replied. "This afternoon if possible." By 10 o'clock, I had dressed in a tailored beige suit and low heels. The sky had cleared completely, bright and indifferent to personal grievances. I drove the 15 miles to Mr. Henderson's office with the radio off. I prefer to think in silence. During the meeting, I did not mention the wedding in emotional terms. I spoke about alignment, about stewardship, about ensuring that future distributions reflect mutual respect within the family. Mr. Henderson nodded thoughtfully as he reviewed the clauses. The trust provides flexibility for precisely this reason, he said. We can place a temporary hold on upcoming transfers related to property assistance and investment matching funds. I signed the necessary documents with a steady hand. The pen did not tremble. When I stepped back outside into the afternoon sun, I felt no triumph, only balance. That evening Daniel called. His voice carried the forced brightness of someone testing uncertain ground. Mother, we just returned from the brunch send-off. It was lovely. I am glad to hear that, I answered. There was a pause. I heard Lauren's faint voice in the background. Daniel cleared his throat. There may be some administrative delay with the property contribution for Emily's new condominium. The bank mentioned a review. Yes, I said evenly. There is a review. Another pause, heavier this time. Is everything all right? Everything is in order, I replied. The trust is being managed carefully, as your father intended. I let the sentence rest between us. I did not accuse. I did not explain. After we ended the call, I returned to my study and closed the folder gently. Power does not require spectacle. It requires position. And I had quietly repositioned myself exactly where I belonged. 3 days passed before Daniel appeared at my front door without calling first. It was early evening, just after 6 o'clock, and the sun cast long shadows across the front lawn. I saw his car pull into the driveway through the living room window. He stepped out slowly, shoulders slightly tense, as if approaching a difficult conversation. I opened the door before he rang the bell. We stood facing each other for a brief moment, neither of us speaking. He looked older than I remembered from the wedding night, as though the brightness of celebration had already dimmed. May I come in, Mother? He asked. Of course, I replied, stepping aside. Inside, the house felt calm, steady, unchanged. He walked into the kitchen and sat at the same table where Emily once planned her wedding details with me. I poured him a glass of water and sat across from him. The silence stretched before he finally spoke. The bank informed us that the contribution toward the condominium has been placed on hold. Lauren is concerned. I folded my hands neatly on the table. The trust is under review, I said evenly. That is all. He exhaled slowly. Emily and her husband are counting on that assistance. They signed preliminary papers. I met his gaze without hostility. Assistance is not entitlement, Daniel. It is an extension of goodwill. Goodwill requires reciprocity. He shifted in his seat, discomfort evident but restrained. Lauren believes there may have been a misunderstanding at the reception. I allowed a faint smile to surface. Misunderstandings are usually accidental. That evening was not. His eyes flickered briefly, acknowledging what he had hoped to avoid. Mother, you know how complicated event planning can be. Emotions run high. I nodded. Indeed they do. Which is precisely why character reveals itself most clearly during such moments. He fell silent. The ticking of the clock filled the room between us. I did not raise my voice. I did not recount the card, the seating, the omission from speeches. He knew. The truth did not require rehearsal. After several seconds, he leaned back and rubbed his hands together. Lauren felt that you have been distant these past few years, he said cautiously. I considered the statement carefully. Distance often follows exclusion, I replied. When one is repeatedly positioned outside the circle, one eventually stops stepping forward. He absorbed that quietly. The house felt steady around us, its walls witnesses to decades of birthdays, graduations, and quiet evenings. I have never sought control over your life, Daniel, I continued. But I will not finance my own erasure. The words hung in the air, not sharp but firm. He looked down at the table, then back at me. What would you like us to do? It was the first direct question of the evening. I answered without hesitation. I would like acknowledgment. Not privately whispered explanations, but genuine recognition of respect owed. Until then, the trust remains under review. He stood slowly, processing what that meant. I am not asking for humiliation or apology delivered for performance, I added. I am asking for alignment. If the family wishes to benefit from what your father and I built, then the family must also uphold the values that built it. He nodded once, understanding settling into his posture. As he walked toward the door, he paused. I should have spoken that night, he said quietly. Yes, I replied. You should have. The door closed behind him with a soft click. I did not feel anger. I felt clarity. Influence does not reside in raised voices or public scenes. It resides in boundaries. And boundaries, once drawn calmly, are difficult to ignore. 2 days after Daniel left my house, the silence shifted. It was no longer uncertain. It was anticipatory. I spent that morning in the garden trimming the rose bushes along the fence line, cutting away the spent blooms with careful precision. Maintenance has always been a quiet discipline of mine. You remove what no longer serves, and you allow what remains to strengthen. Around noon my phone rang. It was Emily. Her voice sounded softer than usual, stripped of wedding day's sparkle. Grandma, she said, are you busy? I set the shears down on the patio table. I am never too busy for you, I replied. There was a long pause before she continued. We met with the bank this morning. They explained the trust review. Her tone held confusion, not accusation. I listened without interruption. They said you have discretionary control over certain distributions. I had not realized that. I walked slowly toward the shade of the oak tree in my yard, choosing my words carefully. The trust was designed to protect the family, I said. Protection includes ensuring that mutual respect remains intact. Another pause. Grandma, did I do something wrong? Her question was quiet, vulnerable. I felt no satisfaction in the moment, only responsibility. I did not answer immediately. Instead, I asked gently, do you remember sitting at my kitchen table in January speaking about honoring tradition? Yes, she said quickly. I do. I remember everything. I closed my eyes briefly. Traditions are not only about flowers or music, I said. They are about recognizing the people who carried you here. Silence lingered between us. I could almost hear her thinking. I did not know about the seating change, she said finally. Mom handled all of that. I believe you, I replied. And belief is important. But awareness is equally important. If something feels wrong in your family, you do not look away. You address it. I did not accuse Lauren. I did not describe the card. I allowed the implication to settle naturally. Emily inhaled slowly. I saw you sitting in the back, she admitted. I thought maybe you preferred it. I let out a soft breath, not a sigh, simply acknowledgment. I have never preferred distance from my family. Her voice trembled slightly. I am sorry. The apology was not theatrical. It was sincere. I accepted it with calm. Thank you, I said. That is the beginning. She hesitated again. Will the trust remain on hold? The question was practical now. I appreciated that. It will remain under review until I am confident that respect within this family is not optional, I answered evenly. That includes how we treat one another in public and in private. I heard her swallow. I will speak with Mom and Dad, she said quietly. Not defensively. Just honestly. I nodded though she could not see me. Honesty has a way of clarifying many things. After we ended the call, I remained beneath the oak tree for several minutes. The afternoon light filtered through the leaves, casting moving shadows across the grass. I did not feel victorious. I felt steady. Influence is not about dominance. It is about reminding others where the foundation lies. If the younger generation wished to build their future upon the structure my husband and I created, then they would need to understand that foundations require acknowledgement. Without it, even the most elegant celebration becomes hollow. And I have never invested in hollow things. It was. For days later when they arrived together. Daniel drove and Lauren sat in the passenger seat, her posture straight, her expression composed in a way that suggested rehearsal. Emily followed in her own car. I watched from the front window as they stepped onto my porch, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows across the steps. I opened the door before they could knock. For a brief moment no one spoke. Then Emily stepped forward first and wrapped her arms around me. It was not dramatic. It was not for display. It was quiet and firm. I held her just as steadily. Inside we gathered in the living room. I did not offer coffee. This was not a social visit. Lauren was the first to speak. Her voice was measured, but I could hear the effort beneath it. Margaret, she began, I understand there have been concerns regarding the wedding. I met her gaze without hostility. There have been observations, I corrected gently. She inhaled, then continued. The seating arrangement and printed card were handled by me. I believed it was a humorous touch, something lighthearted. I did not anticipate it would be interpreted differently. I allowed a moment of silence to follow. Humor depends on mutual understanding, I said. If only one person finds it amusing, it ceases to be humor. Daniel shifted slightly beside her, but he did not interrupt. Lauren nodded once. I see that now. Her words were careful, but this time they were direct. Emily looked between us, her expression earnest. Grandma, I should have noticed. I should have asked questions. I am sorry. I reached for her hand. Awareness is a choice, I said. And you are choosing it now. That matters. Lauren straightened slightly. I would like to apologize, she said, her tone steady. Not for misunderstanding your sense of humor, but for failing to consider your place in this family with the respect it deserves. The room remained quiet after she finished. No one rushed to fill the space. Apology, I have learned, gains weight when it is not followed by justification. I nodded once. Thank you, I replied. Respect is not about seating charts or speeches. It is about acknowledgment. When that acknowledgment is absent, trust weakens. Daniel finally spoke. The trust review has made that very clear. I did not smile, but I did soften slightly. The trust was not punishment. It was a pause. A reminder that foundations require care. I stood and walked to the study, returning with the leather folder. I placed it on the coffee table but did not open it. The review will conclude, I said calmly, when I am confident that alignment has been restored. Not only today but consistently. Lauren met my eyes and nodded. It will be. There was no defensiveness in her voice now, only understanding. I believed her. Not because of emotion but because clarity had entered the room. After they left, the house returned to its steady quiet. I walked to the study and picked up the folded card one last time. I did not tear it. I did not keep it displayed. I placed it inside a drawer not as a wound but as a record. A reminder that silence is not weakness, and composure is not surrender. I had not raised my voice. I had not demanded spectacle. I had simply repositioned myself where I belonged. In this family, as in life, respect is not inherited. It is earned. And once earned properly, it does not require a label at all.